Hi, Andre Bester here, and you're joining me on This Is What We Were Told. How do you equip a seafaring vessel to become a floating home for a family of people and specimens of every animal on Earth for a period of 1 year? What are the conditions aboard such a vessel? This is what I'd like to talk about today. In Genesis 6 and 7, we read that God was sorry that He had made humans and that He decided to wipe out everything by way of a global flood. But there was one man who found favor with God, a man by the name of Noah. Because Noah was a righteous man, God decided that He would spare Noah and his family the flood. Noah had to build an ark, a massive boat that would ride the flood and deliver them to safety. But this was not all. Before the great flood, males and females of every animal species alive on earth at the time would report at the ark, and Noah was to take them aboard. Even though God wanted to wipe out all of creation, it seems He wanted at least one pair of every animal species alive on earth to be preserved in the ark, so that the earth could be repopulated with those animals after the flood. So why not just save all the animals and use a different kind of disaster to bring an end to humankind? After all, God supposedly was upset with humankind. Sorry, I don't know the answer to this question. I don't even know whether this question has a plausible answer. All I do know is that the biblical presentation of events does not make a whole lot of sense. In fact, in my previous talk, I made the case for how utterly nonsensical the killing of the animal kingdom was. If you've missed that talk, please go and check it out. Episode 14, How Wicked Could They Have Been? Essentially, the ark was to serve as a kind of DNA time capsule that was to bring the entire gene pool of the pre-flood era safely into the post-flood era. Noah was the custodian of this ambitious project. Of course, to fulfill the role of a DNA time capsule, the ark had to be custom built for this purpose. And in this regard, Noah received very specific instructions. The ark was to be built to very precise dimensions, measured in the ancient unit of cubits. Now, different translations of the Bible seem to provide slightly differing pictures of the dimensions of the ark when expressed in modern day measurements. So it seems a bit difficult to pinpoint exactly what those dimensions are in, for example, the metric standard. However, the following dimensions seem to be fairly realistic: 137 meters long, 23 meters wide, and 14 meters high. By all terms of reference, a massive vessel for the time. If you were to compare it with a famous historic large vessel like the Titanic, the ark would be more or less half the length and half the height of the Titanic. And this is where the story of Noah and the ark takes one of those turns from which it simply cannot recover. And I'm going to show you why the story of the ark and its occupants is every bit as incredible as it sounds. The ark was to have a lower, middle, and upper level. If the ark's total height was 14 meters, I'm going to assume that each level of the ark would have been, on average, 4.7 meters high. Now, if my maths isn't failing me, the ark would have provided more or less 3,150 square meters of floor space per level. All three levels of the ark would therefore have provided a total floor space of approximately 9,450 square meters. Noah's instructions were to fit pairs of every animal species on earth into those 9,450 square meters of floor space. It's probably safe to assume that in Noah's days there were more species alive on Earth than there are today. Since Noah's time, humankind has effortlessly brought countless animal species to extinction. So Noah most certainly had more pairs of animals to take on board than would be the case if this mission was to be undertaken today. But just to level the playing field for purposes of the point I'm going to make, let's assume that they had the same number of species back then as we have today. That gives us, for example, 200 species of primates, a merry mix from gorillas, orangutans and baboons to monkeys, lemurs and marmosets. What about the really big animals, the elephants? Fortunately, there are only 3 species, 6 animals therefore. Let's consider hooved mammals for a moment. Currently, approximately 250 species of those. But some of them are considered clean and others unclean. Noah had to take more specimens of the clean animals. So in respect of the hooved mammals, we are not going to end up with just 500 specimens, probably well over double that. And bearing in mind that we have several species of pig today, we have to assume that God expected of Noah to take pigs on board the ark. Allow this bit of irony to sink in. The one animal kind that supposedly is the most unclean and offensive of all beasts made it onto the ark. How did God allow this to happen? But the animal kingdom consists of considerably more species than the few we've mentioned thus far. Let's try to form a more realistic picture of what exactly Noah had to contend with in terms of animal numbers. I've tried to do a very rough calculation of the number of animals Noah would have been expected to carry on board the ark. As you can see from this very rudimentary table, I concluded that Noah would have had to accommodate at least 10 million specimens aboard the ark. I hasten to add, this is a very rough calculation and it certainly does not take all species into consideration. This was just a quick thumbsuck exercise covering those animals that are top of mind when one quickly has to list a number of animals on the spot. So 10 million animals are really a very conservative number, but it will be more than sufficient for purposes of the point I'm making. With its total floor space of 9,450 square meters, the ark had to accommodate at least 10 million animal species. This works out to about 1,000 animals per square meter. Now, in all fairness, what are the probabilities that one would be able to fit 1,000 animals into a single square meter? Well, with insects it might be possible. After all, the 2 fleas could, for example, hitch a ride on their host, while the 2 flies could park somewhere against the walls of the ark. Sadly, we know that the ark wasn't intended to only take on insects. It had to take on a lot of other species as well. Species that included specimens that require several square meters of floor space per individual. For every animal that took up more floor space than 1 square meter, so many more animals were left over that would have had to be content with sharing the remaining square meters of floor space by squeezing together. Let's face it, our voyagers aboard the ark probably found things rather crowded. Alas, we've not completely considered the magnitude of the problem yet. The occupants aboard the ark were not going to survive their travels on an empty stomach. They had to be fed, and Noah had to carry enough food on board to feed this entire crowd. So what does a year's food supply for 10 million animals look like? Remember, these travelers weren't on board only for the 40 days and 40 nights of rain. Once the rain started, they didn't set foot on land again for almost a year. They had to have enough food on board for that entire period. In other words, they had to have enough storage space for a year's food supply for at least 10 million animals. Can you see where this is going? The storage space demand is rather difficult to calculate, especially considering that we are dealing with herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores, each with its own unique dietary requirements. Noah could take along plant material for the herbivores, but what about the carnivores? Were they also supposed to feed on plant material, or were they not allowed to eat on board the ark? Let's try to make the question slightly less complicated. What does a year's food supply look like for 6 elephants, 6 rhinoceroses, 4 hippopotamuses, and 500 other hooved mammals? I still have no precise idea, but if we assume a couple of average food consumption numbers, a rough calculation becomes possible. I think, conservatively speaking, that we're looking at about 2.4 million kilograms of fodder for these few herbivores. To put things in context, the Titanic with its 9 decks could carry a weight of about 12.3 million kilograms. But the Ark is not nearly in the league of the Titanic. The Ark supposedly was about half the length and half the height of the Titanic and had only 3 levels. You probably would need at least 2 levels of the Ark just to store the food for my shortened list of herbivores. After this, how much living space do you think is left over for Noah, his family, and the rest of their 10 million animals? Not a lot. The point is this: there is no way that an ark of the dimensions illustrated in the Bible would have been able to accommodate every species of the animal kingdom we know today, let alone the number of species alive in Noah's time. But the ark was more than just a confined space. It was a completely sealed off confined space. Inside the ark, 10 million living beings were oblivious of the fact that they were rapidly turning the available oxygen on board into deadly carbon dioxide, one breath after the other. The ark supposedly had one window, but this window stayed shut the entire time and was opened for the first time only after the ark had settled atop Mount Ararat. Can you begin to imagine what circumstances aboard the ark must have been, even only after 1 day into the storm, let alone 1 year? Imagine being locked inside a small car for hours on a humid day, windows closed, squeezed together with 5 other people plus the products of their bowel movements. This might perhaps give you an idea of what the occupants aboard the ark had to contend with during those first few days. So, with this information at hand, what is the only logical scenario that would have played out? The occupants of the ark would have had to deal with lethal levels of carbon dioxide. On top of that, they would have been exposed to suffocating levels of methane and other gases associated with excrement. And as animals started dying from prolonged exposure to this deadly concoction of gases, the gases escaping their decaying flesh would have hastened death for the remaining souls. The writing is on the wall. Nobody would have survived even a few weeks aboard an ark with the design as pictured in Genesis. And now, thinking about the monumental role that the ark supposedly had to play, it becomes hard to miss the irony. Entering the ark was nothing less than pronouncing a death sentence upon oneself. Any living being remaining outside the ark stood a better chance of surviving the flood by rather holding on to whatever could provide buoyancy. The ark itself would have been a death trap. Now, considering the quest for space aboard the ark, I can almost hear some apologists say, hey, the Bible says that Noah had to take males and females of every sort, not every species. Noah didn't have to take specimens of every species onto the ark, so he actually had sufficient space. Okay, let's think about this for a moment. So, are you saying that God cared more for some species and less for others? Are you saying that God arbitrarily killed off certain species and that he only wanted to continue the road with those few that made it onto the ark? No, I don't think you want to pursue this line of argument. It makes your God appear ruthless and impulsive, especially if you consider that God didn't really have any reason to destroy the animals. Some might be tempted to say that the ark could not have had any space issues because God is able to fit the entire world on the tip of a needle. But of course, if God wasn't a God, he would not have been able to perform any miracles now, would he? This is the thing. All gods are considered to be gods because they supposedly can perform miracles. You do not expect a God to be incapable of performing miracles. So, it is actually no surprise that believers will be tempted to say that for their God nothing is impossible. But you can go check the records. Your God is only one of hundreds of other gods who are all presented as supernaturally able. Your statement about your God's supernatural ability does not make it a factual truth, particularly when all evidence and natural laws point to a different reality. Friends, on this channel I talk about issues of faith and religion that seriously challenged my belief in the integrity of the Bible. In 2020, I published a book on my spiritual journey called This Is What We Were Told. My book is aimed at challenging people to dare to look beyond the limitations of a religious belief and to take in the bigger picture of the wonder of life. I provide some food for thought for others who might be finding themselves in a spiritual dead end and who are searching for a more meaningful understanding of the world in which we live. On this channel, I'm giving viewers a taste of the topics I cover in my book. On this channel and through my book, I aim to awaken people to the wonders of life, playing out right around us, just beyond the boundaries of faith. If you're interested in a copy of my book, mail me at the address on the screen and I'll be in touch. Have a lovely day.